The theme of the conference is the future of payments in the EU. When I read the title of the conference, I thought, actually for the EBA, having been given the task to develop 12 technical standards and guidelines under the PSD2, and we having been working towards the application date of PSD2 on the 13th of January, i.e. 2 weeks ago, for us the future of payments in the EU was meant to start 2 weeks ago with the application date of the PSD2. And we've done lots of efforts to finalize certain deliverables, certain technical standards and guidelines before that date. But as that date approached, we came to realize that it's not going to be a firework. There is no firework on the 13th of January of 2018, where suddenly everything is changing. Primarily because of 3 reasons. The first one is that some of the member state governments have not finalized the transposition of the directive. So I think the Commission is monitoring the transposition status. I think there are just under half of the member states have transposed the directive fully at the moment, and the other half probably have a delay anything between 2 weeks and 4 or 5 months, sometimes for very understandable reasons, because there's been a change of government in that country, and as a result, parliament procedures have been delayed. That's the first reason. The second reason is the PSD2 is only complete when the EBA has finalized the 6 technical standards and guidelines, and we are slightly late with some of them. I have a very reasonable justification. We didn't get actually any resources when we started the work 2.5 years ago. So we already said 2 years ago that we would be late with some of the mandates, but we've done a pretty good job. Hopefully I will be able to convince you about that on the 2 slides that I'll be presenting in a second. And then thirdly, the third and final reason for this not being a firework, the 13th of January, but rather a slow development, is that one of the key mandates that we have received and one of the key elements of the PSD2, the technical standard and strong customer authentication, doesn't actually apply from 13th of January 2018, but sometime in 18, 19, 20 months. And that will be, of course, a key deliverable and a key ingredient. So let's see whether this is going to work. Yes. So I'll give you an update. Some of you might know this slide from previous incarnations, versions that I presented, if you've seen me before. These are the first 2 rows you can ignore. They are not PSD2 related, but everything from row 3 to 14. Does it actually end with 14? I can't see it from here. I think it ends with 14, 15, 13, sorry, are all the 12 mandates under the PSD2, and you have then 4 milestones at the top. Milestone 1, whether we have actually started the work. Milestone 2, whether we have issued a consultation paper. Milestone 3, whether we have finalized the guidelines in English and published them, or in the case of an RTS, whether we have submitted the RTS to the Commission. And the final milestone, if in the case of a guideline, we have published the compliance table, because most of you will probably now know the difference between technical standards and guidelines is technical standards are directly applicable union law. They do not require national transposition, no national implementation. They are law at the moment when they are published in the official journal, following the adoption of the technical standards by the Commission and a successful scrutiny period in Parliament and Council. Guidelines, this is different. They are not directly applicable law. They have to be implemented by the National Supervisory Authority. And there's an option for national authorities to not comply with guidelines. It is possible for them to do so, but they have to provide an explanation. So in order to provide clarity to the market, whether a national authority actually complies and whether a particular requirement is therefore legally binding in that national jurisdiction, we publish for each of our guidelines compliance tables, which represent which summarize what the national authorities have told us in terms of compliance with the guidelines, whether they comply, intend to comply, or do not comply. And we might have some robust conversations with the national authorities if they decide not to comply with them. But they have that option to do so. So, oops, do I need a point somewhere? Try it again. There. Ah, now everything comes at the, okay. Right, okay, now I think all slightly delayed. I apologize. So the first two rows we can ignore. They're not PSD2 related. These are work to be done under the interchange fee regulation and under PSD1. So under the PSD2, the mandates, we have started the work on all of our mandates. That's the reason why you find all of the green checkboxes there. We've also consulted on all of the mandates and received responses from market participants, consumers, trade associations, individual firm, IT providers, fintech startups that are not yet authorized, and so on. We have published the final guidelines in English or submitted the RTS to the Commission on nearly all of our mandates, with the exception at the bottom. There's a technical standard on home host cooperation. This is a cooperation between home and host authorities. We expect those to be done at the end of the first quarter this year, to be submitted to the Commission, and then guidelines on fraud reporting under the PSD2. That will probably be 2018 in the second quarter, because we are trying to coordinate this with the ECB. The ECB has separate requirements for reporting of payment statistics. We want to make it easy for payment service providers like yourselves in order to ensure that you only need to report once with a common set of definitions and templates. So we are aligning EBA and ECB, we are aligning at the moment to make this happen. That's the reason why there's a little bit of a delay. Final milestone is whether the RTS has actually been published in the official journal, or in the case of guidelines, whether the guidelines, the compliance table has been published. Here, the first three of these mandates have indeed been completed, the RTS and passporting, professional indemnity insurance, the guidelines and authorization. Compliance tables are out, and this is very important because these guidelines, the authorization guidelines, professional indemnity insurance, are the guidelines that are required to be complied with by an entity should they want to seek authorization as a payment institution in any of the 28 EU member states. So these requirements are out there and already apply, and national authorities are applying them when assessing the authorizations that are coming in. The next set of guidelines, let's see here, 4, 5, and 6. This is about security measures. It's about complaints procedures. The compliance table should be out within the next probably 3 to 4 weeks if everything goes well. So the market should have clarity on this also. On the technical standards that are then following under 9, 10, and 11, this is not in our hands. It is the European Commission that adopts these technical standards, and then it goes through the scrutiny period. So we do not know when they're going to be transposed at the moment. We do have one RTS on passporting. When they're going to be published in the official journal, we have one, the RTS on passporting, number 3, that is published. So that's already good progress, and I'm sure the Commission is going to be making some progress on the other technical standards as well. From all of these mandates, excuse me, from all of these mandates, the one on strong customer authentication and common and secure communication, this very long word, I think it's number 9, has always been the most controversial one, politically most fought over. For those of you who do not know the history, we've developed a discussion paper, got 112 responses to this. Then we had a consultation paper, we got 242 responses to it, several thousand of pages that we assessed. We amended our technical standard on several dozens of particular points. We then submitted to the Commission. The Commission suggested some amendments. We wrote, that was in May last year. In June last year, we wrote an opinion in which we agreed with some and disagreed with other recommendations that the Commission had put to us. And then in November last year, the RTS was adopted by the Commission. We have last week sent a letter to the Commission, which is on our website, where we have expressed some of our concerns, that we were not consulted on some of these changes that were made after we wrote our opinion, because there are additional requirements now in this RTS that were not known to us. They cause quite some concern, and that is responding, I think, to 1.5 questions that we had in the previous panel about this RTS. In terms of resources, it will be a significant resource impact on national authorities, potentially, depending on how these provisions are to be understood, these new provisions on the EBA as well. And there are various terms that are unclear to us. And for us, given the political controversy around this RTS, it would always be preferable to provide such clarity in the RTS itself, because the RTS, as I explained earlier, it's a technical standards, it's directly applicable law, so it has the highest legally binding nature, and has to be consistently implemented or consistently applied across the 28 member states. And of course, because it's Commission, Council, and Parliament that will have a look at it before it's actually published, it has also the greatest democratic legitimacy. So we'll have to see whether this RTS goes through the scrutiny period of the Parliament and the Council. If it does, and there are no further changes made, and we have no opportunity to suggest some clarifications to this RTS, to be inserted into the RTS before it's published, then the EBA will have to go a different route and will have to use its own legal instruments in order to provide some of the clarifications, such as guidelines, which we can issue on our own initiative. But there are other means, such as Q&As, that we intend to publish going forward. However, as I said, it would have been our preference for this to be in the RTS, but we'll find other ways to achieve the goal, because we need to ensure that this is done consistently across the 28 member states without much divergence, and that is in the interest of everyone. And it needs to be done quickly as well, of course. So in addition to these 12 mandates under the PSD2, we have some other work going on, and that's the final slide, which I also build up step by step. First one is the implications of the transitional period under Article 109 and 113 of PSD2, which is the period between application date of the PSD2, 13th of January this year, and the application date of the RTS, which will be in 18 or 19 months. There's a couple of questions that arose over the last 2.5 years while we were developing these technical standards and guidelines, so we wanted to provide some clarity on that, we thought. And then also the implications for you as firms, to the extent that you are firms, payment service providers, from either the delayed transposition of a directive in a member state or our late development of the technical standards. So we want to provide some clarity on that, and that's what we did. We published an opinion just before Christmas. We worked until late hours, last couple of days before the Christmas holiday, so hopefully you had a chance to read this opinion. If not, go on our website. It is an opinion on the transition from PSD1 to PSD2 that clarifies some of these concerns and a couple of others. The initial feedback we've received from the industry is that it was quite helpful. It is an opinion addressed to the national authorities in order to ensure that they do this in a consistent way across the 28 member states. Then we still have some follow-up work to do, which is the legacy issue from PSD1 and EMD, which is the status of agents and distributors of electronic money under the passporting and provision of services rights. There's still some issues, some different legal interpretations, and we want to make sure that this is consistently done as well. All of that is in order to further the EBA objective of consistent regulation and supervision, and in order to create an EU single market. So there are no differences in member states, and we have a level playing field. Then we have some joint committee guidelines. Joint committee are the 3 ESAs together, EBA, ESMA, and IOPA, on complaints handling. We are looking at whether there is merit or not in extending these guidelines to the new service providers that the PSD2 has created. These guidelines have existed for the last 3 years, cover the entire financial sector across banking, investment, insurance. They are only 1 page long, so very high level, and basically tell financial firms how they have to handle complaints. And we're looking at whether we need to, there's merit in extending those to the new providers or not. And then we're looking at potentially extending what we call the Q&A tool on our website. You can ask us questions in relation to the directives that fall into our scope of action. At the moment, this relates primarily to the Capital Requirements Directive, and the Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive, and we're looking at extending this to PSD2, so that once we have all delivered our mandates and you still have some questions, you can send them to us. It will probably take 1.5 to 2.5 months for us to develop an answer, and that answer is published, and you have some certainty about how to interpret whatever you think needs interpretation. This tool has been running for 3 years, and we've received 1,600 questions on these other directives, of which we have so far responded to 1,200. So the track record is relatively good that we will be able to use this tool, but it's not suitable for everything. And if there are questions in relation to the directive itself, so not our technical standards and guidelines, but the level 1 text, we forward this to the Commission for the Commission to provide clarity, because we don't interpret the directive itself, only our mandates. And then I think Ralph from the Commission in the earlier panel has already alluded to it. The Commission has set up a group to deal with APIs, to advance to progress on developing APIs in a consistent way and in a compliant way. Once the RTS on strong customer authentication is published in the journal, we will take a look at what we can do in order to help that process, what we can do to assist the industry and the Commission in doing so. We have not taken a decision as of yet, because we're still waiting for the final version of the RTS. And that, I think, concludes my presentation.